We can get started this morning. I'd like to call to order the November 10th Destination Medical Center Corporation. I'd like to call us to order. Good morning to everyone in the audience and those that might be online. I think there we go. We have a few people online. Appreciate seeing you there. So thanks for being here, and we're going to get started with a roll call. Kayla, would you take roll?
Of course. Member Baker. Member Campbell.
Here.
Council President Carlson.
Here.
Mayor Norton.
Present.
Member Rybeck.
Here.
Commissioner Tyne.
Here.
Chair Wheelock. Member Williams.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to ask for approval of the agenda. We all got this in advance, so would someone move the agenda?
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, we do have to do roll call today because we have people remote. So Kayla?
Certainly. Member Baker. Member Campbell.
Aye.
Council President Carlson.
Aye.
Mayor Norton.
Aye.
Member Rybeck.
Aye.
Commissioner Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock. Member Williams.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you very much. And the next order of business is the approval of the minutes, which you were sent in advance.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Seconded and thirded. And could we have a roll call on that, please?
Certainly. Member Baker. Member Campbell.
Aye.
Council President Carlson.
Aye.
Mayor Norton.
Aye.
Member Rybeck.
Aye.
Commissioner Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock. Member Williams.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Wonderful. And that will be probably the end of our formal votes today. Today's meeting is more of an informational one with a lot of wonderful updates, which we're looking forward to. But before that, we do public comments. And so this is an opportunity for anyone in the public who wishes to step forward to address the board, the DMCC board. They can. We ask that you state your name for the minutes. Keep your comments to about 2 minutes so that others might have time to speak. And also understand that we're live streaming. So there may be people watching online. I think there's a chat feature, but I don't know if we have people watching online but there may be public comments there as well. Is anyone from the public here to address the DMCC board? Is there anyone online? No. Okay. So we'll move on. And so I'm going to close the public comment period and move on to the chair's report. I am stepping in for our chair, Pam Wheelock, who is unable to be with us today. And so I don't have any formal comments, but I think it's also just a couple notices. We are going to have a meeting, joint meeting in February. And she wanted to share that she wanted to thank the staff who had post-September who had answered the questions that she'd had, and she just wanted to thank everyone for being so responsive. Is there anything anyone wants to say about? She's asking about board evaluation, and I'm not familiar with what she was going to ask for here. Patrick, would you?
Madam Chair.
Yep.
Had Pam been here today, Chair Wheelock been here today, she would have introduced the idea of her interest in talking to board members about their experience as a board member and anything that they would ask for in terms of improving the experience. And
is this of the joint meeting?
No, this is of
all?
the board of the
Okay.
board as we get into 2023.
Okay.
2023. And then she also was going to introduce the idea that in addition to or beyond the joint meeting in February, the possibility of doing post-board meeting luncheons, which would involve presentations perhaps, and other members of the community could join, but a totally opt-in kind of thing. And I think she'll, as she's talking to you all about your experience as a board member, will raise that conversation as well.
So do we want to open it up right now for comments, or are these comments that should be directed toward the chair?
I think perhaps with her absence, it'd be better to wait until she has a chance to talk to people.
Okay, so with that, I will just tell my colleagues here to talk to Chair Wheelock if there's anything you wanted to talk to her about our board structure and about the upcoming meetings, to do so. And she'll follow up with you, I'm sure, when she's feeling better. So we have a pretty full agenda, and there are many updates, actually. So I think rather than just go through those now, I think what I'll do is just move forward with the agenda. Yeah, we have a consent agenda. But
So
we
moved.
want to go through each of those items, do we not?
Yeah, I think the consent agenda item, before we go into the discussion items, there is the 2022 year-to-date budget update that is on the consent agenda.
And so you'd like to review that before we vote on the consent agenda?
I think just that's the only item on the consent agenda, and we'll come back to the metrics in Soldiers Field following that action.
Okay,
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. I guess we're going to take a roll call on this one.
Member Baker, Member Campbell,
Aye.
Council President Carlson,
Aye.
Mayor Norton,
Aye.
Member Rybeck,
Aye.
Commissioner Tyne,
Aye.
Chair Wheelock, Member Williams.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to the metrics.
Got it.
Okay, Patrick, would you like to introduce this?
Yes, thank you. So as you all know, and I'll be joined here by Jamie Rothy from DMC and Heather Heyer from the city. As you all know, we have a standing agenda item on every board meeting associated with metrics, and you have asked us each meeting to come to each of these meetings, looking at one of the areas that we are focusing on, that we're measured on over a 20-year period, knowing that that there is an opportunity to do a bit of a deep dive into that. In this meeting, we are going to look at the goal of experience. So our fifth goal is to achieve the highest quality patient, companion, visitor, employee, and resident experience. It's a lot in there and a lot to unpack. For today's presentation, we're going to look at resident experience, people who live in Rochester. And to do that, we have turned to the work that the city did in late spring, I believe, and where they conducted a survey of Rochester residents, presented those findings, at least a version of those findings, to the city council in August, I believe. City council took that up and had a conversation about it. For our sake, we're going to look at those findings as it relates to Destination Medical Center and the things that we're involved with. So with that, I'd like to ask Heather, if I'll give you this, Heather, if you would just talk to the board about the approach that you took, and then we'll turn to Jamie to look at some of the results.
Great, thank you. Hello, my name is Heather Heyer, and I'm a management analyst with the City of Rochester administration team. It's a pleasure to be here today. And yes, I'm here to talk about the National Community Survey that we conducted in the spring of this year. It was the first time that we've conducted this survey with the NRC National Research Company. So this is really a baseline metric for the City of Rochester. It was conducted from March to April of this year, and it was a probability-based sample. So we sent specific invitations to 5,500 households in Rochester. And among that, we had 828 responses. We also did have an opt-in survey, but I'm not presenting those results. So everyone in the community was given the opportunity to respond, but we're just reviewing the statistically significant responses today. So again, overall, it was a 16% response rate, and it is statistically weighted to reflect Rochester overall. With that, the results have a 95% confidence interval with a plus or minus 3% margin of error.
We all know about margin of error.
Yes, we do. Timely. One of the reasons we chose to run the survey with the National Research Company is because of this comparison data that we have. So there's more than 500 communities across the nation that use this survey, as well as many here in Minnesota. So Olmsted County runs this survey with 4 other counties in the state. And they did it about the same time as we did this spring as well. And overall, the survey is trying to ascertain what the community livability facets are in Rochester. So it takes into account all of these things from mobility, community design, utilities, safety, natural environment, parks and rec, health and wellness, education, arts and culture, inclusivity and engagement, and the economy. Among all of the questions that are in the survey, we had 6 items that were above the national benchmark and 6 items that were below. And I'll just mention briefly, we'll talk about some of them in detail here, but the ones that were above the benchmark were Rochester as a place to work, employment opportunities, traffic flow on major streets, availability of paths and walking trails, availability of preventive health services and health services. The items that were below the national benchmark were Rochester as a place to visit, variety of housing options, availability of affordable quality housing, availability of affordable quality childcare, yard waste pickup, and impact of the economy on the family or house in household income.
Great. So before I turn it to Jamie, just a couple of things to say about the survey. This was conducted by the city. We're trying to data mine it to see what we can get out of it that can be helpful to us. It's a snapshot, so it was one moment in time. It doesn't reflect, there's no history behind it, or this is the first time the city has done it. So it represents a snapshot and we understand it. And I think it's important that we do not necessarily try to make any policy or action out of the results of this survey. Although I think there is an opportunity for us to better understand our work in the context of this survey. So I asked Jamie from our team to look at the survey through the lens of Destination Medical Center. And in so doing, look at a question related to jobs, a question related to the visitor, how people feel about this as a place to visit, question about transportation, a question about housing, and a question about public space. And also to understand a bit about not only how do we rank when compared to other cities, but are there things about our makeup of our community that could further inform those results. So with that, Jamie.
Sure. Good morning. It's great to
morning.
see you all. So as Patrick mentioned, we looked at 5 different questions and used the lens of the DMC work to select what questions we wanted to look at and present to you today. So the first one that we looked at was employment opportunities. And when asked to rate Rochester's employment opportunities, you can see before you that 68% of respondents rated it as excellent or good. This is one of the ones that is above the national benchmark. I think what's incredibly important about the data set that we were able to look at, though, is that dove deeper into our community and was able to look at that disaggregated information, which tells a little bit different of a story, and it helps us to start to understand where do we need to be more curious. In this one specifically, there's a racial disparity between our white community and our BIPOC community, and something to pay attention to. The next one we looked at was a place to visit. When the survey asked to rate Rochester as a place to visit, 43% rated it as excellent or good, and this is below the national benchmark. We were able to dive into this data as well, and I think something that's important here to note is that there's some age disparity. When you look at our older population, or 55 plus, they seem to be more satisfied, but our younger population, young families, young adults rated it, not as many rated it as good or excellent. The next area that we looked at.
Can we ask questions on this, or should we? Is that okay?
Do we want to do them
Madam
as we
Chair?
go or at the end?
I can do it at the end, Madam Chair.
How many are you going to go through? Just the 5 areas. So they've got like 4 more slides.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great.
Sounds good. The next area that we looked at was availability of affordable housing, something that we talk a lot about in our community and a lot of different groups are working on. When asked to rate Rochester's availability of affordable housing, 16% rated it as excellent or good. This is below the national benchmark, as you might imagine. And there was no disparity in the data in this set. So across the board, looking at age, race, owning your home, not owning your home, that was very similar across the data set. We also looked at the transportation system questions. This one specifically asked to rate Rochester's overall transportation system. 63% rated it as excellent or good, and this was similar to the national benchmark. And there was some age disparity in this data set. Our family aged or middle-aged adults felt differently, quite a bit differently than our older population. Thank you. And then the last one we'll cover is public spaces where people want to spend time. And when we asked in the survey, or when the city asked the survey to rate Rochester's public spaces where they wanted to spend time, 49% rated it as excellent or good. Again, this was similar to the national benchmark. And there was some age disparity in this area as well, meaning that maybe young families or young adults may feel differently about the offerings that we currently have in our community, relative to our older population.
So these are the five, Madam Chair, board members that we wanted to discuss with you today.
And so we did have a question from RT. Do you want to entertain questions now, or were there comments you wanted to make first?
No, I think we'd welcome any questions at this point.
And the one comment that I had before we get started is this was done in April and March, if in that area before before spring and summer, when many of our new DMC amenities were complete and open to the community. So it would be interesting to see moving ahead as some of that work is completed, whether that makes a difference, particularly in the downtown area, people's experience. But RT, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to dig in a little bit to that that visitor experience. You know, in our work on this group, I'm always careful to balance the visitor experience with the residential experience, and it's both. But you know, one of the very high original goals, and perhaps the reason we have destination in our name, is to really make sure that we were able to be more attractive to visitors who saw Rochester as a value add as they make decisions about other things, certainly medical. So when you did that stat, it really bounced off for me that the younger people went. You didn't say it that way. You said younger people, and you put together two groups that I think we should consider digging deeper to separately. There are young families, and then there are young people without families, and they sit next to each other, but they're two very different attractions. My sense, and I think the general sense I pick up from folks in the community, is it's a really good place to raise a family, and my wife, who was raised there, agrees. I have 5 nieces and nephews who were raised in Rochester. They all say great things about them, but not one of them is living there. And whether they're visiting or living or not, these two groups, I think, are terrifically important for us to understand more deeply. So I think we need to get a deeper sense of, what does that mean? Does that mean that visiting Rochester, there's an expectation to have more bars and restaurants? I don't think it's that simple. I would wonder if we're not leading forward with other things like the bike trails, et cetera, or whether this is something that bleeds over into other issues like recruiting young talent. So we're not going to solve that this morning, but I just think because that's popping out, and the age thing should be very important to us as we're trying to attack and retain talent. I think we need to get more information using this as a baseline.
I agree, RT, and I appreciate those comments. And I think, interestingly, this is to remember, this is the resident, people who live here's view about visiting, not necessarily the visitors' view about visiting,
right.
which might be somewhat different. So
Yeah,
but
exactly.
also I see Jim has his hand up too. So if we're, then I'll go.
Just a quick follow-up to Art.
Okay, Brooke, do you
I
want
was
to?
just going to say, notably, those are the 16 years of my life that I left Rochester and then came back to read. So,
Right.
Jim, did you have a comment?
I think Jim's hand's been up for a while, so I'm
It
not
has
sure.
been, and so. Oh, he left or got kicked out of the meeting. We'll see if he comes right back and we'll get his comments. In the meantime, others at the table until,
Madam Chair.
yes.
So are you going to present more slides? I just have a comment about the overall
Yeah.
survey. You got more that you're still going to know?
No.
So I I think this is wonderful, and just really gives us good insights. I'm curious about the comparison cities, and again, if you're comparing Rochester to, Memphis or Chicago, or so and is there a way to break down that comparison a little bit further to similarly sized cities, just in terms of the analysis? So that's just one piece, but the other piece is I would love to see us do this annually, and perhaps even consider tailoring it or adding to it other additional qualitative questions that might dig further into some, particular issues that we want to look at and think about. So again, I'm just, I think it's a wonderful tool. I love doing it annually. You can't read too much into it, but it does give you some insight, and over time, I think it can help really inform you, particularly on particular topics.
Ms. Heyer, do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for that feedback. The survey itself, we aren't able to dig in deeper to the benchmarks from the survey that we can just conducted. We could, in future surveys, narrow that benchmark community closer to Taylor to compare to Rochester. And the city has planned on doing it every 2 years, and that is the rate at which Olmsted County is doing their survey as well. So we will have more data in the near future.
That's great. And that was the question that I had written down to ask, is because you mentioned that the county had done it at the same time and the city is within the county, right? Did they have the same type of uptake? We had 16%, which actually I think for surveys, 10 over 10 is considered a pretty good uptake. I'm sorry, there were two questions I wanted you to address. One is, can you help the community understand, because we've had some feedback at the board table recently that 800 or however the number was isn't really representative. If you could kind of hone down on addressing why it is or isn't representative. And did the county have a similar result? And was there any differences that you saw between, assuming you've looked at the county results, between the county and the city? So I was going to ask that.
Yes, thank you. I don't remember, the county did have slightly higher participation than we did, I believe. And I don't remember their results exactly that I can speak to at this time. The second question was—
the first part was about statistically significant and the number of people that responded, and why we can assume with that 95%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So the NRC goes through and does weighting of the survey to make sure that it's representative of the community. So they looked at our demographics and then applied weights to those who responded in those categories to make it reflect Rochester's community. And so that's where we gain that statistical significance, and with that confidence interval of 95%.
One quick
Sure.
follow-up to that, based on Member Williams and Mayor Norton's, is there an option to tag on any qualitative questions?
Yes, and we did that this year. We added a half page of questions, and we were specifically looking at online and in-person services offered through the city. So there would be some opportunity. And we have started talking with the county about what we could potentially do in the future if we combine our efforts.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to compare the city and county results, knowing that even though people may not live in the city of Rochester, they have experiences, most of them in our community. So there may be some reason to look at that and compare moving ahead. And so I think there's some good stuff there. Anyone else? We've got the county sitting right next to us. Does the county have any comments here?
I don't recall the specific details of the county survey, but always curious. I agree with Member Williams that this is always interesting, but I'm always curious what we do with this information. It seems to me like we gather it, we look at it, we admire it, and then we go on to something else. And I also find it curious that 63% of the population found our transportation system is excellent or good. And what does the transportation system mean? Is it our roads? Is it our transit? What is it?
So a couple questions there, and I see Patrick C. would like to respond, and Heather. So which one?
Well, Heather, you go ahead.
The transit system is, I believe, is talking about buses primarily in that system. So there are separate questions about roadways and traffic.
Just to, this actually is the aggregate. This is the roadways and the
Okay.
buses. And so this refers to all of the ways people get around. So cars, buses, bikes. So I think part of, for example, when you look at the results there, the older population seems satisfied. The younger population less so, and perhaps it's possible that people are looking for more modes of transit, more modes of transportation, younger people when compared to older population as an example. So that question and the one we're looking at isn't only related to transit.
So I'm curious what the transit numbers were then. I mean, I think I'd find more value if I knew what we're doing well and what we need to work on as
Yeah.
compared to the overall where it says we're
Yeah.
doing as expected.
Yeah, and I think maybe to follow up on that, the question would be, if you say you've combined transit and other types of options, was there anything? My assumption would be that if it's not listed here, that it was average, like other comparative cities. But maybe that's not
Madam
fair.
Chair,
Yeah.
Member Tyne, actually, no, there is a lot of data in this. There's and there's many ways of doing crosstabs and doing analysis. So this only touches the surface, and it only helps you understand that as it relates to things that we're working on, here are some of the findings, not all of the findings. Some of it is intuitive, or what we thought might be the case, such as the disparity between whites and people of color as it relates to job opportunities. So we score very high in jobs, but when you look deeper, you find that that not for all populations. And so I guess what I would say is this doesn't intend to cover the entire data that was made available to us. I think in answer to your question, what do we do about it? Well, one, I think we look at places that we can study more closely. So as it relates to transportation is a good example. There is breakdowns of different parts of the transportation, so we can study that closely. And housing, the affordability, I mean, we're so far, we're so low on that at 16%, that there is just a lot of work across the table on that. So it's not really meant to give us all the answers. It only gives us some clues as to things that we can work on or study more completely.
And I would say to that, and then I think Jim's back. I think I saw him, and I think, oh, did he disappear again? Oh, no, he's there. Good. Just a minute, Jim. And then Paul wanted to say something, but I think to remember that today we're here talking about the DMC, the downtown core, and how this impacts that. But from a city and county perspective, we step back from this table and think about it in a different aspect. How is it affecting the whole city or the whole county? And I think, anything you can glean, because we can't put all of transit or all of housing on the DMC board's responsibility, or that's, a couple square miles. So I think just to kind of keep that perspective. Jim, you were there a moment ago. You've disappeared again. Are you able to, I'm ready for your question if you can do it.
I think I'll hold my question until we get later in the agenda, if that's okay. I missed
Absolutely.
some here, so I'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well,
Mayor,
and
a quick,
just to Member Tyne's point, I think what I take from this mostly is additional insight into priorities. And so 16% satisfaction on affordable housing. So what I'm looking for is what are our priorities here at DMC, to the extent that we're able to drive on that priority. I think transportation. So for me, the question is, how does our work plan reflect those priorities? Public space, housing, transportation are three big areas, I think, that DMC is working on. So again, it's about insight, and I think the key question is, what is it that we're going to do about it, and what are we doing about it already, and priorities. So
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
RT. Mm-hmm.
To pick up on Paul's point and then also bring this back to your point, Madam Chair, about what is our responsibility. The transportation question is a really important one for the community of Rochester, city, county, et cetera, to ask about how is the overall transit system working. We should care very much just in general, but our real focus is how are people getting to and from the center of town during the workday, and specifically, what is the visitor experience in the transportation? So I don't think our issue is as much how the buses are working. I think it matters a lot about was it easy to park. So my audio is screwing up, so I'll stop at that.
Thank you. And we are running to the end of our time here. We need to switch subjects. Are we close enough? And I think I would encourage everyone that thinks about this between now and our next meeting or whatever. I know the DMC and the EDA, I'm sure, will be thinking about this issue and to give other insights to the DMC office, if you have them specific to DMC and the metrics.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate this. I think it's really helpful.
Thanks, Heather.
We have the Soldiers Field Master Plan up next.
So thank you, Madam Chair, and invite Mike Digber to join us. He will, this is what vacation looks like in the Parks Department. I come in and testify before the DMC board. So welcome from your vacation.
Happy to be here. So
Thank you for that.
I've asked, invited Mike to join us and Jamie again on this topic. At the last board meeting, the DMC board authorized a contingent authorization for funds for the Soldiers Field improvements, pending final design. And we're not here today with final design. We're here today to bring you the progress that has been made and to identify for you what we think are the places in which the Soldiers Field design aligns with the DMC objectives and mission. And then we'll look for any feedback you have about that and then tell you about the timeline and next steps before you will potentially be hearing about this at the February meeting for final action. So with that, Mike.
Sure. Mayor, nice to see you again.
Good to
Thank
see
you
you.
for having me today, and members of the board. I appreciate the time. When we start talking about a master planning effort, we always like to go back and look at what the history of the park is to some extent, where we started from. In this case here, Soldiers Field had been around for a long time, 1930s era park, and it was developed with a partnership with the American Legion. They really led the effort to create a new space for Rochester, focusing on the recreation for not just Rochester, but Olmsted County. And it really was a centerpiece of our recreation activities for many, many decades. The course was developed as a golf course with 6 holes initially starting with. Later, the pool was added, the track was added, you saw here. Various play elements like the baseball field, softball field, really a shot put area, tennis courts, et cetera. Really a quite dramatic space at the time. As we've evolved as a community, this recreation space has evolved as well. Many of the spaces has changed. So the tennis court's been reduced down to 4 courts. It was 5 courts initially on. The track has been modified. The pool has remained the same. That's part of the problem we're talking about today. But the track area, the shot put area has been gone away. The road circumventing the entire park is now gone. It's now a bike trail for that southerly half. The clubhouse has been changed at least twice. Memorials have been built, et cetera. So this park has really evolved to meet the needs of our community as time has gone on. So in 2014, based on things like the survey, the About You survey, based on community surveys over the years, based on input we received by council members and park board members, we embarked on a master planning effort to really see what this park could be utilized for. And again, thinking back to the comprehensive plan, the DMC master planning effort, the downtown master planning effort, these things all played a factor in why we were doing this today. At that point in time, it was probably the biggest community-led effort for engagement that we had in our park system. Really focused on stakeholder engagement, surveys along with that, input sessions, and they really guided the whole process of what this park should look like long-term. At that point in time, we had a set of guiding principles that were developed, and the highlights of the park plan at that point in time were really focused on maintaining the memorials, and people love the memorial that was out there, the Freedom Shrine, as well as the main memorial, wanted to keep those intact. Enhancing the aquatics has been a factor for our community for a long time. So enhancing that, making improvements to the running track. It's an area that was sorely needed for improvements. We added ag lime in the past and coal cinders. It just was not meeting the standards that we wanted to have for running activities going on there. Changing the park to a 4-season use as well. Along with that, then modifying spaces to really reflect the current changing needs, modifying courts, taking out a ball field, and one more controversial item, which is changing the golf course to a 9-hole course. That was really a big community effort to say, what do we want to see this park looking long-term? Again, based on that input, saying we're going to have 10,000 new residents living downtown, et cetera. Bringing it to today, we also had a community engagement session. Again, probably the largest that we've ever had for our park system to date as well. And again, this participation by the community has helped look at that 2014 plan and brought that back forward to 2022. 12 different meetings, 35 different stakeholder groups, an online survey, online mapping activity were part of the first phase of engagement. That engagement led to 3 concept plans being developed, where we had a second round of engagement, which then led to another survey, stakeholder input further on those activities, along with then pop-up events and further engagement with some stakeholders that we don't normally hear from. So Rochester Fest, Thursdays downtown, et cetera, has really provided us good context of what this plan should look like. In the end, we ended up with a master planning effort that really reflected the community's desires. And while we did have some improvements made from the 2014 plan, it was really pretty limited because of lack of funding. So track modifications was a pretty big effort the council found money for, along with the parking lot improvements. Everything else is really just minor modifications, though impactful. So for example, 6th Avenue, when we cut off the exit to 6th Avenue, that was a cut through route for the downtown area. It really slowed down traffic in the park and made it much more usable and user-friendly, frankly. So the current 3-year plan kind of expands upon that same action that was done back 5 years ago. In this case here, the short-term plan we'll focus on is retaining the 18 holes of golf, modifying a few holes to reflect expansion of aquatics for the most part. And again, we'll see how that plays out. Looking at expansion of the trail network, the north area coming from Discovery Walk, and then looking at the southwest area, which has been identified from at least 1985 for a connection down to Highway 14 area. And again, moving on from that, other plan changes is the aquatics area. And this aquatics area conversation was really focused on the community, what they wanted to have. And again, we heard lots of comments about lazy river, a shallow play area, the splash pad area, along with a new lap pool. The current facility, if you've ever been out there, is really a sorry state, to be honest with you. So this plans to make several improvements along with that. The only good thing about this building or this facility right now is the bathhouse. Still in good condition, needs to be renovated though, bring it to modern standards, changing it to reflect usability by both not just male and female, but the cross diversity of our community. So these changes are looking at really enhancing the community's benefit for the long term. Other things like shade structures, amenities, how you separate areas, keeping quiet spaces for others that may have sensitivities for noise and other issues like that. Then also looking at shoulder seasons, so that spring and the fall, how do you modify this aquatics to make it reflective so you can use it longer periods of time, without the full swimming pool being active. These are all things that this next community engagement session is happening right now. So a co-design group is gathering. They're looking at design activities, how these elements fit together, what spaces are necessary, how the interior of the bathhouse will be laid out. They'll guide this process for us and hopefully reflect back in a plan that will come forward here in December. Other areas of park improvement have included the East Playground area. Again, the playground itself is in pretty good condition, but when that was built, it was AD accessible at that point in time, but really not reflective of our community today. So modifying that to be more AD accessible, adding more sensory abilities for others to play is the focus point of that easterly area. The west area, West Playground, well loved by the community members, raised funds for that. They want to keep that forever and ever. We acknowledge that that may be challenging. So looking long-term, how do we address those issues? So again, it's in good shape right now. One of the biggest concerns that we've heard from those people, the users of that playground area, is parking. Right now, there's parallel parking on West Soldiers Field Drive, or Gibbs Drive as we call it, that needs to change. So we're adding some perpendicular parking similar to the east side of the park. And again, that will help make that playground area usable long-term. How that evolves long-term for the playground and maintenance of that area, we don't know yet. That's the next phase of our planning effort that will happen in 5+ years. The last area is looking at our West Picnic area. And again, proposing a West shelter and restroom facility to meet the needs. We've heard this over time with community members saying we need more space that is available, free, low-cost barriers for entry, et cetera. A West shelter does that in this park here, along with adding basketball courts, something we've not heard in the engagement process for Soldiers Field directly, but we've heard that across other engagement activities, saying a better distribution of our assets, playground areas, court areas, et cetera, needs to happen. We're lacking that facility here in this park, so we wanted to add that as part of this first phase of development. Oops. Jamie.
So as I've asked Jamie to present to you our interpretation of the characteristics of this park, how they align with the DMC goals and objectives, and why it's something eventually that you may want to ultimately commit the CIP resources to. And so with that, Jamie, go ahead.
Sure, go ahead.
Sounds great. So the first thing that we wanted to touch base on when we looked at how does this align with the DMC initiative was in the development plan. We talk about each of the sub-districts having extraordinary public spaces. And so when we look at that far south sub-district, the recreation sub-district, this meets that need. So it was one of the key alignments that we saw. We also have other key elements to alignment that I wanted to bring to your attention. A lot of the work that our team does together as we look through the lens of equity and inclusiveness and access. So that was something that we talked a lot with Mike's team about, and you can see them in the guiding principles and the master plan update. Incorporating sustainable design practices is also something that's built right into the master plan guiding principles as well. We also wanted to make sure through discussions that there was this theme of connectivity. It's important that our downtown is connected, and that's constantly part of our thinking and part of our discussion and strategy. And of course, we want to continue to align the DMC vision of America's City for Health with all the work that we do and use that lens as well. So when we took those key elements, kind of started breaking down all of the different design elements that Mike just talked about. So if we break them down into these different categories, just quickly, you'll see when we look through the lens of equity, you'll see enhanced aquatic strategy that's focused on accessible design, improved bathhouse and restrooms, and inclusive play. So it's all examples of what is in the design that Mike has shared with you today, and that lens. Access is really important. That limited barrier to entry, something that anybody can just walk into the park and use, is incredibly important. So there's no cost for them. It's very limited. So they can have access to trails, exercise equipment, play areas are all incredibly important. The addition of basketball courts and other types of activities all meet that criteria and align really, really well. Of course, sustainability, the connectivity of the river, vegetation, our natural play areas, and even pool improvements will help in this direction as well. And connectivity, this area of previous map, you'll see connects right into Discovery Walk. It's going to be quite beautiful to be able to walk out the doors of Mayo Clinic and see Soldiers Field. You'll be invited in. Of course, it connects us to the river, which is incredibly important to our planning efforts and our future discussions around the 6th Street Bridge efforts that are happening. So Patrick mentioned where we are today in this timeline. We have Mike's team is leading a co-design team around aquatics work group, taking a deeper dive into that and understanding what that looks like. Once those are done, we'll bring back more details to this board to take a look at.
Well, before that, it'll go before City Council and the Parks Board again for final action before coming to us. So this board will be responding to something that's been adopted locally.
Correct.
That's our presentation, and would welcome any feedback or discussion.
Yeah, we can have some discussion about this amongst members. I think if I'm trying to think back to our budget, was it 10 million had been allotted from the DMC budget for use on the northern end of Soldiers Field.
That's right.
Okay.
That's correct.
So comments, questions from anyone?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Do we have just a rough ballpark estimate of cost here? I mean, I know from my experience in municipal government, parks are a big deal for cities. And I'm just curious if there's an overall ballpark. I'm just thinking about DMC dollars. I mean, this could be a big important price tag. Any sense of that?
Absolutely.
So yeah, fair question. The overall project right now that we're looking at for phase one here is about $18 million. That includes $10 million of DMC funding, which we appreciate, along with a federal grant and local funding along with that.
And is the overall redesign and redevelopment of the park, is that subsequent phases? Is there a ballpark?
Yeah, so no, the subsequent phases, the initial phases are the aquatics, the east playground, west playground, north and south trails, the west shelter area and play area that way. That's predominantly the main 5 areas. That's the $18 million project. The remaining programmatic activities for longer term is about another $15 million. Again, that's not all inclusive. So for example, if the course were to change, there's additional costs there. If we're doing some additional modifications that may come up in a future master planning effort, those are not accounted for either. So again, those are kind of future undefined dollars.
The 18 million is for the short-term plan as
short-term
was
plan.
shared here.
Correct.
And just one follow-up, did soccer come up at all in the feedback from the community? Or is the football field, the track and field complex, does that include a soccer field?
So the space between the track area or circled by the track is in fact a field that can be utilized for both events as well as sports. So we have ultimate frisbee going out there. We have pickup soccer going on out there, but it's not the soccer fields that people utilize for the weekly games.
Yeah.
It can happen. It did come up, by the way, it's got a conversation. In fact, a stadium was brought up as well. So again, that did not meet the final cut in the master planning process, but that was a conversation.
Thanks.
And I really appreciated this discussion about creating a more year-round feel. And I know there is interest, the ice skating rink, which I think was written somewhere, but you didn't mention, has been active for a couple of years in that space year-round, as well as cross-country skiing. There's certainly interest in this community among curling. And because we have cold months, although it certainly has felt warm this week, we have snow and cold, and it's great to be able to utilize this large near downtown space for outdoor activities all year round. So I appreciate you talking about that as well. Brooke, did I see you?
I'm just thinking through what I want to highlight. I guess I will say, as we look at this plan, when you're talking to the community, there are all sorts of different interests from different groups. So it's important to think of this in the context of our overall system of parks and recreation here in our community, and that we're not trying to solve everything we need all in one place. We're really trying to prioritize those amenities that are accessible by public transportation to our nearby neighborhoods, to our downtown and our visitors. But I will say that this idea of having an improved aquatic center has been one of the things that I've heard since I became a council member regularly. Why don't we have what Casson and Stewartville have? And we really need a more family-friendly, varied aquatics experience. So I'm excited that we're going through that co-design process, because that takes a little bit of the onus off of the policymakers and really can lean into the community and what that experience can be like. So hopefully we can support that then as policymakers. And my final comment is that we do a lot of master planning in the city for good reason. We want to make sure we know what our strategy are in our different public spaces. But this is one of those rare opportunities where we do have a funding model and this sort of braided funding model of different types of sources to make this happen in the near term. So it's really exciting. And I think I said last time, is one of our very real amenities for our whole community that is reflective of DMC investment.
And I think it's worth reminding some folks, because not everybody on the DMCC board is from Rochester. We passed a referendum several years ago for our parks. So we do have that as well. And that is part of how we're funding, excuse me, this one. Sorry. As well as letting you know that this is one park in the DMCC area. We have a few others, Mayo Park, that's kind of in this area, but we have nearly 100 parks in Rochester. So to your point about soccer and some other activities, we know pickleball is huge in this community. We have a number of other parks that are focused on and need to expand, frankly, because of the needs that we're hearing from our community. So it may not all be downtown. It may be a little further out. Are there any other questions? RT, do I see your hand up? I can't tell very well.
Yes. Yes, you do. Thank you, Madam Chair. First, just a clarification and then a comment. Just a clarification. So am I correct that the total price tag for the project is 18 million and Destination Medical Center is putting 10 million in that, slightly over half? Am I right on that?
That's correct.
So, you know, one of the things that, having sat representing a city and talking to the state, trying to get dollars for parks within your city, like for instance, the Chain of Lakes or regional parks in Minneapolis, people who represent us in the state would push back on and say that parks are very local. I made the case against that, but you know, part of my job representing as a state representative on this is to be able to answer the question, why would Destination Medical Center pay more than half of the cost of this local park? I can very strongly defend that. And I do that by saying that, think about the previous discussion we just had about retaining and attracting and the visitor experience. And think about what we have and haven't yet promoted in Rochester. I believe we have a great opportunity coming up with this project, with the riverfront, and some of the key infrastructure ones, notably Discovery Walk, to be able to tell a very different story that differentiates us from our competitors. I recently drove by Cleveland Clinic. I can guarantee you, you cannot walk from the Cleveland Clinic to a golf course or a swimming pool. And with our competitors, about the best they can put up is a putting green on the roof of a windswept Days Inn. This is a huge piece of the story we should tell, that also about, gee, we can, with a few minor bike trail improvements, we can ride to the Bluff Country and go incredible places, or we can go to Welch and hop on a inner tube and go down the Cannon River, et cetera. There are many, many communities that have far fewer green amenities than Rochester who are getting much more play. Certainly Duluth has taught us what you can do by marketing the outdoor adventures and connections to nature and recreation like golf. Asheville and others. I think we need to play more heavily into that area. And that's why I strongly support us putting up more than half the cost of this. And as we do that, making sure that the city and Destination Medical Center are in alignment about how this incredible, great new asset or improved asset is going to connect to Discovery Walk and the riverfront.
I couldn't agree more. And I thank you for those comments. And one of the things maybe is worth remembering is when this legislation was up at the Capitol, it was based on research that had been done, and there were pillars of needs that were identified. And this actually was one of the pillars of need that was identified. So it absolutely was in the minds of people who thought up this Destination Medical Center initiative. It was part of the answer. And this is indeed, to your point, one of them. I see Mike Nigber would like to make a comment.
Yeah, just real briefly. Thank you for your time. I can't remember who mentioned the question about what are you going to do with the data from these surveys in the past. And anecdotally, maybe not one specific item for an individual survey, but really that aggregate of survey over time, that information that we keep hearing from our community members. This is what drives these changes, is that commentary that goes on and on again, over and over again. Trails have been a big factor. The aquatics have been a big factor. We're responding to that community that has said this over years. So I want to point that out.
Yeah, thank you. And I can say, as someone who's had some booze downtown and takes phone calls from visitors and residents alike, our trails, our paths, and our park amenities are mentioned all the time by people. So good job by the park department. Any other questions, or are we ready to move on?
Just to remind then, should anticipate our coming back at the February meeting with a request for action. And that'll be very important because the timing of this is such that I believe getting in the ground this spring will mean that the park space and the aquatic space will only be out of commission 1 year. So it's either April of this year or April of the next year.
And that's really for the aquatics only. So we'll come back at a different time or present other information on, for example, the playgrounds. That's not quite as timely, or the trails. It's not quite as timely as the aquatics. We only have that one season to do it. Otherwise, it's now or next year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Jamie.
our next, we do have some more presentations for folks.
We do.
We have project discussions, and so we're going to hear updates on Discovery Square, Heart of the City, and mobility. And so the folks that are presenting
Yeah.
can step forward.
Great.
And again, all, to the DMCC board, if there's other thoughts or ideas you have, feel free to share them. And Patrick's always open to taking comments after the meetings.
Thank you. So thanks. To grab there's a name tag in there too. So thank you. And we are looking forward to this discussion today regarding Discovery Square. And today, in addition to Chris Shad, who you know, Catherine Malmberg, who you know, and Mike Flynn, who you know, and many of you know Brent Webb from Mortensen, I've asked them to join me in a presentation about how we are doing with Discovery Square. And some of you at previous meetings have asked specifically about 2 Discovery Square and 3 Discovery Square as we get prepared for eventually growth of that area. But before we, or as we do that, I've asked Chris really to jumpstart the conversation and to remind us all, I'll give this to you, Chris, remind us all what we developed as a strategy that you adopted as a strategy for the innovation district that we call Discovery Square. And so using that as the context to talk about the work we're doing around office and laboratory space and business recruitment. And so with that, Chris, I'll leave it to you to take.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Patrick. Madam Chair and Board, thank you for the opportunity to give you this update on Discovery Square. So we're going to take a step back in time to 2018 when we had a conversation around the overall strategy for the innovation district as a whole. And a lot of the conversations since then have really focused on numbers 1 and 2, but this is just a reminder to our board and to ourselves that what we're really building is an innovation district writ large, not a series of real estate or business transactions. And so that strategy, as we articulated it back in 2018, was yes, a variety of office and laboratory space for companies in diverse industries, but also the large and small businesses, ensuring that they have access to the resources, including their Mayo Clinic partners, as those companies grew. A vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem, which I think in looking back 2018, we might have been a little bit ahead of our time, but as I see a lot of momentum now in the area of entrepreneurship taking place in the county and in the city, but also ensuring that there's a variety of capital and grants and capital basically available to businesses as they need to grow. And those businesses need a diverse and educated workforce. And as we've learned over the last several years in talking to companies, workforce is always top of mind. And when they're asking about the value proposition about being in Discovery Square. So what we're going to talk about today then is really, we're going to focus on the 2 areas, and I'm going to turn this over to Catherine and Brent in a moment. We're going to talk about the office and laboratory space, which is conversations we've had in the past, but give you an update on where we're at in this particular space. So as we described it then, and as we continue to describe this particular element of the innovation district, this means yes, office space. The context now is a little bit different, as we know that office space is more available now than it was back then, COVID related and just technology related, but we still need office space that's proximal to the laboratory space. But life science laboratories, good manufacturing practice infrastructure, computation infrastructure is more important than ever for data intensive operations. And we knew that we needed to complement the existing space and acknowledge that there was already space here that was hosting technology companies. And we needed to complement spaces such as the Bio Business Center and the Conley Moss Downs building. So I'm going to turn this over now to Catherine, and she'll give an update on what's happening in what has happened in 1 Discovery Square and 2 Discovery Square.
Great. Good morning, everyone. So this board is familiar, of course, with the first major investment in the real estate infrastructure in the Discovery Square sub-district, which is 1 Discovery Square here. And what you see up on the screen are sort of the parameters under which this project was initially approved. So around 90,000 square foot, 4-story life science building. It includes a mix of lab and office and collaborative public gathering and retail space. approximately a $35 million total private investment. And the property tax increase figures are so far right on target, possibly even a little bit ahead of where we had projected. And now I'll hand it over to Brent, who's joined us here today from Mortensen to talk about their on-the-ground experience here in One Discovery Square.
Thank you, Catherine. DMC board members, Madam Chair. It's so great to see everybody in person. I know that we've been doing a lot of this virtually, but that still is also consistent with, our experience right now in Discovery Square. But I think we have set the stage very well. We were very intentional. We continue to be very intentional on who the tenants are in Discovery Square. And that really set the stage well for how we started. We were specifically trying to target tenants that were going to be part of a collaboration community. And I think we have done that really successfully, especially with our partnerships, not only here within the city, the DMC, but also the group that we have managing the facility, the Music Ant Group, to help create a unique experience for the tenants. I think one thing that we've learned is that, those unique experiences are important, but we also had to adapt during COVID. Obviously, we did some things virtually, but I think one of the things that's really successful are the tenants in One Discovery Square that really helped us launch into Two Discovery Square, which is what we can show next on the screen. So now at Two Discovery Square, I know we talked about this many times. We really started this in the midst of COVID. I think we were very optimistic just based upon the conversations we were already having. We were building off the momentum of One Discovery Square, but there was also some uncertainty. One thing that has come out of our experience is that I think a lot of people have heard there's a ton of investment in life science, and I think we position ourselves well. I think one thing that has transpired is that a lot of these conversations have taken longer. I think one thing that is exciting, but has also been a shift, is this new relationship between Mayo Clinic and Resilience, which I know is very public. What has changed in our conversations over recent is that group Resilience was actually going to take half of the facility. And so with that, we actually had to make some modifications, but I think those investments were rightly so, but also it has changed our timeline for lease up. What I can tell you though, is that those conversations are advancing. I think the next time I hope to see this group in February, we'll have more new announcements, our successes for other leases, but there's still a lot of work. And I know that, this team here is going to continue to dig in, and there's going to need to be more of a commitment. I think one thing that we were not able to do over the past few years is that we couldn't meet people in person. We couldn't actually go out and spread the word of what was happening in Discovery Square. And we have essentially accelerated that. And I know Mike is going to talk about a lot of our efforts that we're planning on doing in 2023.
Thank you.
So some other updates in terms of what's going on within the Innovation District. We heard about the Soldiers Field master planning effort. Discovery Walk, as you well know, is a thread that connects the core downtown to that pearl down there that is the Soldiers Field Park. And why this matters, Jamie mentioned that we wanted a signature public space in each of the sub-districts. That's what this is in the Discovery Walk Innovation District. It's important to that visitor, patient, and employee experience, and it makes that connection. The status on this particular project, phase one is wrapping up with the end of the construction season. So the 500 and 400 blocks are nearly completed for the season. The street will be open. If it isn't already open, it will be open shortly. The sidewalks will be open. The landscaping will be completed, finalized next spring. Phase two construction begins in the spring of 2023. And another important component is the community shelters. That bid approval is going to be pending city council action. You may recall that the community shelters that are designed along the space, they're an important design consideration for Discovery Walk as we talk about designing spaces that encourage collaboration and connection both inside and outside of the buildings. We have that inside One Discovery Square and Two Discovery Square. And these shelter spaces really make that happen on the outdoor spaces along the plaza space. Those structures came in over bid or over budget, I should say, originally. The team went back and sharpened their pencils or went back out to bid. It now has come in well under bid or under budget, I should say. And there will be something coming to city council here soon for action on the bid package for the community shelters. And other things that are what's next, the
the Discovery Labs concept. We've heard conversations about this here at the last board meeting. We continue to do analysis on the idea of lower cost laboratory space, wet lab space, dry lab space, perhaps sim lab space, to encourage that entrepreneurial community that is here. 3 Discovery Square conversations continue on what that might look like. The Kellen Research Building recently had their topping off ceremony about a month and a half ago, and then completion of Discovery Walk. So from a construction perspective, those are the things. And the building and space perspective within that larger strategy, those are the things that we see happening. And
Why don't we pause
Sure.
there before we go on, just to see if there's any questions about the physical environment that we're developing.
I think it's worth, and we could take questions. I think it's worth noting, for the community, there's a lot of construction in our community, and we do hear about that, right? But this is building for our future. I think the projects seem to be going along quite nicely, the timing of the buildings and the timing of Discovery Walk. So I think that's working well. I know the businesses, in the area are looking forward to having clear streets. So hopefully we can get those open soon for them. And I really appreciate, and I just wanted to say to Brent's, comments, how much, I think we all appreciate the effort that and the foresight that you guys have had in your development and how difficult it's been in this climate. And I appreciate that you have continued on with your vision for our community and for your buildings. And I think, this is a difficult time, but we're coming out of it. And hopefully, as you said, it's taken a little longer maybe to get where you want to go with these projects, but I really appreciate your stick-to-itiveness with this. And I know, it will benefit you, it will benefit this community. It'll mean lots of wonderful jobs in the future. So I wanted to thank you for that. And also just mention that we've spent some time this last week with a team at Harvard who looks at business development and growth. And what you're doing in those buildings is exactly what we need to be doing for our community, which is taking the assets we have and diversifying in areas that are aligned near it, right? And that's what your buildings are doing. So I think in looking at that information and hearing what they told us, we're doing the right thing. It's just, as you pointed out, maybe taking a little longer than you anticipated, but I want to thank you. It's probably been a little nerve-wracking during this time, but
Thank you, Mayor.
yeah. And I don't know if any others have comments or questions.
Madam Chair.
Yes, RT.
You're making a really good point, Madam Chair, and I think it's worth amplifying about what this period of time is. It's absolutely not a surprise to anybody that leasing office buildings is more complicated right now. But we're at a real realignment of how work takes place and all of that. And net, it's not surprising that a tenant might want to have a little less, or that other one may put it on delay. We are in a long-term partnership with Mortensen on the Discovery Square thing. It's not about a season. It's not as if there's a metric of, my God, we have to have another big lease signed. I think as we hear this though, and we recognize that office space is changing, the reality may be that there will be more tenants taking less space. That's a good thing for us, actually. I think we could get in a little risky position with those buildings if 1 or 2 big people took huge footprints and then either it didn't work and they closed it, or they bought another building in Rochester, which is great, but it would leave us in a difficult position. So I like having more, especially in more entrepreneurial fields like we're looking at, have more players in all of this than a few really big ones. That means taking more time. That means we may have to get a little more patient on when ground breaks for a next one or not. If you're in a long-term partnership about developing what I think is the single best way to diversify the economy of Rochester, I believe we need to be patient partners who are asking tough questions, but are also really leaning into trying to attract more people who may be using less space.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. I also had one more question on the Discovery Walk area. You kind of just briefly touched about that. Part of the design of this and the co-design of this from the beginning had to do with, it had a lot of art involved in it. And I hear that you've had to rebid and make some changes. Is the art still a component of it?
Yes. Yeah, the art is still the component. And the Sophia Che's piece and Ayub Haji Omar's piece are still part of the Discovery Walk plan and will be implemented.
Okay, and so the perhaps in the next few weeks or when you come back to the city council, we'll hear a little bit more about what those changes are with the rebid. Because I don't know right now what those changes are. So
Okay.
is that coming in a few weeks?
Yes, I'm looking at my city colleagues, but yes, that'll be coming to the city council for action on the bid package for the shelters.
Okay, terrific. So if there are no other questions, I don't see hands up online. We can move ahead. I think you still have a few more things to talk about. Mike hasn't talked.
Yeah. So good morning. Mike Flynn with the DMC. Happy to be back today. As I was putting some notes together, I reflected it was about 1 year ago exactly that I presented to this body for the first time, sort of in the way of introduction of who I was and what I was going to be working on. And I'm excited to be back here a year later and sort of talk about some of the things that have been accomplished, some of the things we've learned and where we look to go forward. Chris mentioned sort of the 6 elements that were identified in that original study. The first is obviously the physical space. The second is what are all the things we're doing to fill those facilities with employers and with people doing exciting, innovative things. So over the last year, one of the things I've been doing is trying to spend time understanding or learning what the unique value proposition is in this community. And I think it's fairly intuitive, but testing that with the market and trying to understand how they perceive our value proposition. Developing and testing some different strategies to go out and build awareness and build a pipeline of activity and trying to figure out where we have the most traction and where we have the best return on investment. And lastly, building a lot of those partner relationships that we've talked about in this meeting before, whether it's our partners at Mortensen or our partners at Deed, partners at Mayo, Medical Alley. There's a number of people in this state that are doing things that are helpful to our efforts and our mission. And we want to make sure we're connected into those the right way to make sure we leverage that. So going into year 2, I would say we're much better informed than we were a year ago at this time around where we can have success, how we can have success. And I feel comfortable saying that I think at this point we have a sort of a defined working strategic direction on how we go about accomplishing some of these things. There'll obviously still be adjustments going forward, but I think we're in a good position. So if you dive into that second element of how do we add businesses, there were some specific things that were called out, namely that we want companies from a variety of sizes. And I think Member Rybeck sort of identified, you don't want all your eggs in one basket. So we wanted a combination of very high growth, small companies, maybe larger companies doing more sort of traditional or defined work or known work around specific technologies. We want companies from a diverse sector of industries. For our purposes, they're probably all going to be in the life science biotech space, but there's a lot of room for us to work within that space. We had an identification of international businesses being, I think, a particularly good source of development for us. And again, we want to partner with different organizations doing things supportive and tangential to our work to make sure, again, that we sort of stretch our dollar and stretch our effort as much as possible. So we've been working or making a concerted effort with our strategy to be sort of reflective of some of these points. So to that end, want to run through sort of what the work plan for this year has looked like. And there's 5 color-coded rows there. I'll talk about each of those briefly. The top is really about what I would sort of call operational intelligence or capacity building. How do we start to build process at DMC to be able to cover more ground in the future? And that involves building systems. That involves building different aspects of the program so that some of these things become more efficient. We can cover more ground. And there's a lot of work we spent in the first year doing that. We also have engaged in a fairly significant awareness and perception study to more formally understand what these different audiences we're trying to talk to think of us. What do they know about us? What perceptions do they have, good and bad? And what does our messaging need to look like in order to reach them? We've spent a fair amount of time working directly with real estate communities nationally and internationally. Again, these are sort of connector audiences that have the ability to get us a bunch of exposure fairly easily if we can inform them and influence them. And so we want to spend time there. We've built a lot of lead generation process. This is sort of the idea of we go out and talk directly to specific companies that are doing something that we think we have sort of a compelling argument for. Inside of that, there's process we have to build. There's messaging we have to build. Each one of these campaigns, we identify each of those green boxes as an individual campaign Each one of those we've tweaked to sort of get better take rates, to get better conversion rates, and ultimately put more things into the pipeline. And then we've done a fair amount of industry outreach, again, across a diverse sector of industries. We've got things in device, things in regenerative medicine, constantly trying to figure out where is our sweet spot. Where do we get the best return on our investment? There are no shortage of places we can go, but not each one of those is going to bear the same amount of fruit. So we want to have an intelligent program where we're not doing a lot of things sort of at a low level, but we're doing a few things that are very successful for us, and we're investing a lot of time and effort in those. And then that bottom gray set of boxes is really everything we're doing from an international perspective. I think I've mentioned at this board or maybe your other board at least once. I think when I started a year ago, I thought our pipeline would be probably 80% domestic, 20% international. And I think one of the big learnings for me over the last year is that's probably flipped. I think we have a lot more capability in this market to focus on international companies that have to be in the US, that want to be close to an anchor institution like Mayo, and that frankly like the idea of doing it here in a place that's easier to do business, more affordable, and has a lot of those same assets you would find in a big market, but in a much easier place to do business. So in 2022, this is sort of a snapshot of what we've done. We've got 2 months left of the year. We're going to finish strong, but has been very successful, both I think from an outcome standpoint, but also from an education standpoint. A couple key updates I wanted to touch on since the last meeting we had. And again, all of these things are sort of in alignment with that 2018 strategy. So we were a big participant in Mayo Clinic's inaugural Investment in Healing Conference, brought a tremendous number of venture capital organizations to Rochester for a day and a half, tremendous exposure for the city, for the clinic, but also for Destination Medical Center. We had the ability to get in front of that audience and give a very targeted pitch to them on what we do well here. Again, if you look back to that original strategy, we need to develop capital sources in this market. We need to develop, a pipeline of that activity, and this was a great avenue for that. We hosted the Association of British Healthcare Industries in Rochester for a day. Again, if you reflect back on focus on international, these companies represented a fairly diverse array of businesses in the life science and healthcare industry. So again, in alignment with that original strategy. We had an event in Montreal. We focused on regenerative medicine in an event called Meeting on the Mesa. We've got device conference, digital health conference. We're doing a lot of things to get the DMC brand out in front of these audiences to start to build that recognition, that awareness. We're focused on a lead generation campaign before the end of the year, targeting companies that would be good partners or be able to utilize the Mayo Clinic's platform program. So again, doing a lot of different things, and we look to finish up our awareness and perception study. I am regularly getting updates from our research company on that and what these markets know about us, what they think our value proposition to an expanding life science company might be. And again, all of these things are going to inform our program going next year, which we represent here. So again, same 5 focus areas. We want to build some capacity around our digital footprint. We have a much more balanced program. You'll notice we try to spread things out during the year. It makes for more sort of efficient activity. There's a pretty solid plan, execute, and follow-up process we try to follow to make sure that we sort of leverage everything out of this. So a more balanced program, a more balanced lead gen program that operates in advance of all of our industry work. So again, we want to be out talking to those companies sort of virtually before we're in front of them at an event. We are looking to build a signature event. You'll notice that box in June is sort of highlighted around bio. Bio is a very large life science biotech focused event. I think it could be sort of our Super Bowl at DMC when it comes to awareness building. Looking to build an event around that we can leverage some of our board members, leverage some of our partners at Mayo to really try and get out and relaunch DMC or reinvigorate that DMC brand in front of a whole host of people, again, that are regularly looking for places to put investment. So I think going forward, we want to have 3 or 4 of those events throughout the year that can be places that we really go capitalize on from a branding perspective. And lastly, I'm a big advocate of metrics. It's a thing we've spent a lot of the time in the last year trying to figure out what should we be tracking, what should we be reporting on to you, what of those metrics are most in alignment with an outcome, which is again getting people to occupy those buildings and drive the demand for more buildings. And sort of what we've hit on over the first year is, the more we're out in front of people, the better. The more we're bringing people to this market to see it firsthand, the better. The more companies that we are constantly engaged with, sort of on a one-to-one conversation, the better. And again, the more we're bringing our partners into this conversation and letting them sort of tell our story for us, we think we'll have better outcomes. So I look to us to build sort of a scorecard approach to our activity that we can put in front of you regularly, that hopefully will drive more conversation around what we're doing and why we're doing it that way, and are we really driving the outcomes that we all want. So happy to stop there and answer any additional questions.
Thank you very much. Jim has been waiting very patiently online with his hand up. So would you like to start us off?
Well, going back to Madam Chair, when you asked me about my comments earlier, first of all, I'd say that the updates today have been excellent. I didn't realize that we were going to get the survey results the first time the city has done this, and to me, this is absolutely critical. I mean, having people tell us the pros and cons of how they really feel, and the fact that I guess this is the first time we've done it, and we know 6 items that are above the national average and 6 items that are below the national average. I mean, that's absolutely critical to understanding who we are and how we stack up going forward. I especially appreciate the updates on Soldiers Field, Discovery Square. I mean, that's brick and mortar, that's real estate. Mike, you and I talk, I think, frequently about your work, but I've got a suggestion that's been sort of haunting me, and that is that, there's so many pieces of this, workforce development, venture capital that you mentioned, the people that were just there for a day and a half, Mayo's involvement, real estate, public space, the recruiting efforts. I'd really like, Patrick and Mike, for you to come back at the February meeting with sort of the big picture of how we're packaging all this in our effort to convince people to come to Rochester, Minnesota, as compared to going to Boston, to going to San Diego, even going to St. Louis, of all places, with what's going on down at WashU and that Jewish hospital down in St. Louis. And I'm very aware of what the University of Minnesota Foundation's doing to acquire land adjacent to the medical school to do almost exactly the same thing that we're trying to do in Rochester. But I really would like to have you sort of tie all this together in a big picture marketing piece that's the piece that we use to go to market. And it's not just what our pitch is, but I'd also like to know who's involved. I know Mayor Norton, I'm sure that every time you're asked, you're the first one in line to be involved in telling the story and trying to convince people to come to Rochester. But I mean, I've been involved in this sort of marketing effort for 50 years, and there were times when I'd have to go to my CEO and say, I really need you to be involved in the recruiting effort to get a piece of business. And so my question is, I'm sure John Noseworthy was involved from time to time in major efforts. I'm not sure whether the new CEO has actually been engaged in that. But I'd really like to know who the public sector people are and the private sector people are that are sort of on the teams that are put together to make these presentations to convince people that Rochester should be the premier life science location in the world. I love all the bits and piece presentations we get every board meeting, but I'd really like to understand how we tie it all together to take it to market. I don't know whether that makes any sense or not, but that would really be helpful. The other thing I just say is that as a board member, I'm not sure that one chart that we just saw, Michael, that showed the plan for 2020 through the elements. I don't think that's in our book, is it?
No.
I mean, I mean,
don't know.
that
There's
piece.
a handout, Jim, that they had.
Oh,
and
okay.
that
All
they
right.
did
Well,
not hear. I'm sorry.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that I'd really like to, get my hands on to sort of understand that. And then also, as you talk about what's happened in the fourth quarter of 22, I mean, we hear about these things, the day and a half of VCs who were in Rochester for a day and a half, and what you did up in Montreal. And I mean, those are critical things that I think the board needs to be better informed of, because that's sort of how we're taking this story to the marketplace. So anyway, I hope that, Patrick, that you and Michael can sort of sift through my rambling here and come back to us at the next board meeting with how we take this story to the marketplace that allows us to be the most competitive resource available.
Well, Jim, I thank you for those comments, and I couldn't agree more. And it's why it was so important to me, and I think others, that we hired Mike a year ago, because we do understand that we have to market ourselves and we have to understand the industry. And he spent a year planning for us. So I've also availed my time this coming year to the DMC board, saying that I would help with any recruitment efforts that they need. I'm not an expert in the field, but as mayor, I'm happy to be out there, right, and help. So yes, I've notified them of that. And now that the election's over, I can second that I will be around for 4 years to do that. So
And there's key people within the Mayo organization that are really critical. I mean, they are, in some respects, they're perhaps the most important. And maybe even the governor has to be called. When I think about Minnesota as a place to go, and I read the Fortune 500 magazine, and I look at where corporate America is going, it's going to Florida, and it's going to Texas, and it's going to Arizona. Mayo's in Florida and Mayo's in Arizona. And so sometimes I wonder, does Mayo really want to put it in Rochester? Or do they want to put it elsewhere? And so it's really critical. I've said this before at other meetings, that we really truly understand what Mayo's long-term strategy, and they've got to be deeply involved in helping us recruit these people to Rochester.
I appreciate those comments. Mr. Ryback, you have your hand up, I believe.
Yes, I would say there is certainly no living person in Minnesota who's been involved in more pitches for the community than Jim Campbell. So when he says this, we should listen. And I think it really sets this point of, I love what I see. I love the program I have. I hear about you, Mike, going out and making calls. And I just want to amplify the point Jim is making, mobilize us to bring others who might be more influential too. When I took this appointment, I said to the governor, I expect I will be calling you to ask you to be involved in these pitches. And when the new governor came in, I said the same thing. When I update him on what we're doing on Destination Medical Center, I said, you should all be ready. And I know he's been asked on certain things, but also, I run the Minneapolis Foundation. We have a number of funders who make large contributions to Mayo. They have networks that they can do. I've done a lot of pitches myself in doing this. We know people who are effective at this. So the difference between this and a lot of other places should be that there's this huge group of influencers that are doing it. There was a Sears building in Minneapolis that was vacant and filled with Bat-Don. And the only way that we convinced Alina in there is there was this incredible business leader in the city of Minneapolis who publicly, but most important, privately worked with boards and mobilizing people and others. That's the only reason that is not still empty and filled with Bat-Don. Jim Campbell was the guy who led that, but he strategically did it tactically and worked amazing stuff. So you got this hugely important resource in him there, and all of us who want to kind of line up on the posse. So put us to work.
So what I'm hearing is perhaps a future conversation with the leadership at Mayo and asking for a little more support visibly I'm hearing that from a couple of folks there, as well as other influencers. And also one thing that, we have the 2022, 2023 plans laid out here, but depending on what happens with the World's Fair, and if Minnesota does get that is another opportunity to be in front of a huge number of countries. And I want to keep that on our radar here at DMC as well, so that we can capitalize on what will be if we win it, a healthcare focus. So just going to set that out there. I know it's a few years out yet, but it should be on our radar particularly if the announcement comes out this year that we have won that opportunity, we should be planning for it now, not waiting too long. Are there other board members here quietly sitting at the table? Paul,
Just a quick question on, or a comment on outcomes, just back on One Discovery Square to see the one bullet that says property tax increase from 64,500 to 700,000 per year. In terms of, do we think this is a good investment? I think the answer is yes.
a resounding
That's
yes.
just the local, that's the local effect.
Yes, thank you. I saw that too and was going to report it out. I'm glad you remembered that. So if we're done with this topic, we can move on to Heart of the City and mobility. And thank you so much, all of you, for your work and for presenting today.
Thanks. Chris. Great. We have brief updates regarding Heart of the City and Discovery Square, rather mobility. And Jamie, I'll let you take over with respect to Heart of the City.
Good morning again. It's great to see you. I'm just going to provide a real brief update on the Heart of the City project in 3 different areas. One, we wanted to provide an update on the Heart of the City Phase 1 project, which is the east side of the plaza and First. The last time that we presented to you, we had shared that there were some updates happening throughout the plaza, just adjusting some pavers and making some improvements as the plaza has been in place for different areas for about a year. And so those adjustments just needed to be made. The last step is the installation of the catenary light system, and we see that happening this winter. We also wanted to provide an update on activation. It's been wonderful to see so many different groups use the space in a variety of different ways. The Chateau Theater, I think many of you know, is active now and holds a number of different events during the day and in the evening, and it draws a lot of different types of people to the plaza. And there's many community events. The image to the right is an event that was held by a local artist, an artist group, and it was called Art Attack. And this is a piece of art that was put in the alleyway next to the chateau. And they activated the space with all kinds of different artists from the community with art inside the chateau and up and down the Peace Plaza. It was a wonderful event. Up next, we're anticipating a viewing of the World Cup happening in Peace Plaza. It'll be a public viewing, free for the community, and also holiday programming. So it's wonderful to see so many different people use the space. The last update I wanted to provide is on the post-occupancy analysis. Last time I was here, I shared with you that Gal was in our community or planning to be in our community in September. They've now gathered information, have analyzed that, and given us the tools to start diving into that. We have a work group between the city and DMC team that we're understanding that information, gathering information from that, and then we'll be back to provide a report to this board the next time we see you in Q1.
So just to be clear, GAL is an urban design firm that is doing this research. And I want to underscore the alley activation in case Mayor Rybeck didn't hear that. So
Bless your heart.
yes. So Madam Chair, we don't necessarily need any action but would invite any questions or conversation before moving to mobility.
Questions or conversation? We have a quiet group. Anyone online? Hearing none, you can move on to mobility if you'd like.
Oops, sorry. So mobility, again, we have a lot going on in that area. We work in partnership with the city. Cindy Steinhauser, Deputy City Administrator, I think is here. Cindy, Catherine will provide a 1-slide update and we'll leave it at that.
Great.
Thank you.
Yes, we are continuing full steam ahead with the BRT. Cindy and her team are at continued fast pace to move us ahead. There was some great artist community engagement around the various places within the BRT system that art will be integrated that happened in October and November. And then everyone's focused on these upcoming milestones for the key state and federal environmental reviews and risk assessments that should be complete mid-2023. We would anticipate the bidding process to commence by the end of 2023 alongside the finalization of the vehicle design and placing order for the vehicles themselves. So that's kind of what's next on the horizon in 2023 for the BRT process. As far as West Transit Village, the RFQ responses have been received by Mayo, and they've narrowed down those respondents to a short list to proceed to the next step, which is a more detailed proposal that the developer teams will give to Mayo as to how they want to integrate the various requirements on the site and infuse it with housing and retail as well. And then in other mobility updates, the active transportation coordinator has been hired and starts at the end of the month. So we're excited to fold them into our team here. That's all I have.
Anything else?
That's
Any
all the
comments or
update that we
questions? Yeah. Well, thank you for that update. I think the next part of our program here is for the EDA work plan implementation. And it says equitable economic development. So we're going to
Yes.
have
Thank you.
a team come up.
Yes.
So I think
So as
yeah, I'm looking at the notes here from the chair who's missing. She said the goal with the presentation is to contextualize our equitable development efforts within the broader community equity and inclusion work.
Yeah,
And,
so as
hand it off to-
teammates join us, let me just introduce the purpose of this presentation is that the DMC board has, I think in its wisdom, directed us to think about our work through a lens of equity. And at the outset of the DMC initiative, that was defined really around ensuring that people of color, minority-owned businesses, and veteran-owned businesses had opportunities around contracting. And that we set a target, you set a target. It was really a relatively low bar of entry into this work, but it began us on a journey around how do we do this work together, both at DMC, but together in the community with our partners. We did receive, over time, we developed skills. We recognized that it's more than just the workforce, but there's lots of ways in which we can think about equity. Under Kevin's leadership, Kevin Bright from the DMC team, we were able to secure support from the McKnight Foundation, really linking the first time ever they linked together their climate change program and their equity program into a single grant. And we were the only recipient where they chose to do that. And so we are a bit of a testing grounds for them about how they relate those two pieces of work. And that has led us to really a much more robust approach to equity in our work. And so with that, Kevin, I'll turn to you to
the slide and answer would be great.
yeah, lead this presentation and introduce the other members of the group here.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. My name is Kevin Bright. I'm the Housing and Sustainability Director for the Destination Medical Center and the City of Rochester. I help with some sustainability efforts too. I'm joined today by Chow Motella, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director for the City of Rochester, Dee Sable, the Executive Director for the Diversity Council, and Wafao Khalifa, the Equitable Development Coordinator for the DMC EDA, and they'll all be helping with the presentation today. So thanks for the time. We're going to cover a number of different topics, and this is purposeful to meaningfully address systemic inequities and racism. Equity needs to be kind of embedded in every area of our work in order to make meaningful change. So today we'll cover a number of different topics that you'll see in front of you. To start, I'll turn it over to Chow to provide some context about the disparities that we see here in Rochester and current demographics.
Good morning, and thank you for having me and providing the opportunity to just provide a brief overview, a snapshot of our community. Certainly when we're talking about equity, it's really important to think about all the various identities that are reflected in our community members. And I just wanted to mention that this is certainly not an exhaustive list of what that representation looks like, but what is shared with us, by the United States Census Bureau. So it is evident if you look at our community in general in terms of growth from 2010 to 2020, we have not only increased in number, but we have actually really changed in terms of demographics. There have been vast changes when we talk about race and ethnicity, seeing that about 73% of our residents are white and 26% are BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But what I find really interesting about this is if you look at other communities our size, they haven't seen changes that are this vast, right? And of course, in snooping at Rochester Public Schools and looking through the K-12 system to see what that looks like, they're at about 44% of BIPOC. So if we're thinking about the next 10 to 20 years, we're looking at our community almost being 50% BIPOC and about 50% white residents. So thinking through what that means for how we engage with our community and how we connect with communities that hold that diverse identity. We have a large number of our residents that are foreign born, which means that a lot of our community members do not have English as a first language, right? So about 20,000 of our community members are not English language proficient necessarily. They may be, but maybe a lot of comprehension is in other languages. So what does that mean in terms of how we connect with those community members, how we connect with them and engage with them? A lot of our residents, about 12%, have a documented disability. I know this has been a topic of a conversation when we talk about access, specifically in housing. So thinking about those community members and how we connect and engage with them. Our community compared to others, if you look at that 7.4% on the very bottom that says poverty level by income, we could look at that number and say this is a really great number, which I mean 1% is not good, but 7% compared to the rest of the country is fairly good. But what is important is for us to disaggregate that number. So 7% for our community, when we disaggregate it and look at our Black residents, it's at 40%. One of the greatest disparities that you would see not only in our state, but around the country. So thinking about disaggregating data is something that we do consistently, making sure that we're thinking about how communities are impacted in all of the different identities that they hold and how our policy decisions and our budget decisions reflect those disparities. And then good segue to how we advance economic justice. So knowing that in 2017, DMC adopted workforce participation goals and targeted businesses goals. We've been really fortunate to have a teammate, Jory Johnson, who's here today, who does a lot of work in this space and does great work, both for the workforce and the businesses. And I just want to read through some things that she has worked on in the past couple of years. So for workforce specifically, supporting construction career training curriculum through workforce development and other sources, facilitating community workshops, to learn from others about starting or growing their businesses, supporting career pathway opportunities. For example, the Bloomberg Project that is currently working with local businesses and future businesses to understand upcoming construction within our community, speaking with diverse communities about design and construction careers. And then for businesses specifically, creating simple pathways for businesses to achieve targeted business certification. And this is important because certification helps them to build their awareness for future work. With these goals in place, contractors and developers are able to refer to these certifications, right, to help identify subcontractors that they could utilize in their projects. Secondly, collaborating with business organizations to help entrepreneurs realize their business visions. And then through this work, also identifying some obstacles that folks have faced, particularly smaller businesses. And this would include things like bonding and higher insurance that is required. And in the next year, we hope to kind of delve into this and analyze it a little bit more and compare our approaches to other communities that are doing this work. And then lastly, building relationships with communities of color to speak to workforce and business opportunities that exist in our community. And with that, I'll pass it on to Kevin.
Thank you, Chow. To change gears a little bit, we'll move into equitable housing. So a lot of work has happened in this area, and even last board meeting, we were here kind of with the Housing Coalition reporting out on some of the strategies that we've been working on collectively. But ultimately, housing is a critical piece of infrastructure. As more people move to our community, more people fill positions, we need more housing units so people have a place to live. So at the same time, while we already have a need for housing within our community, we'll only have a continuing need for more housing in our community, and particularly affordable housing. So that's been a really large focus area of our work, my work, as well as WFA's and many others in our community for a number of years. The BRIC project is on here specifically because it's a good example of a project that we're really proud of. Mixed income housing tied to transit, proximity to downtown and trail systems. really provides an affordable living opportunity that we're seeking here in our community. And finally, we've had or in addition to, hosted a number of developers from the Twin Cities, folks that are kind of providing and developing housing projects that we are particularly interested in realizing here in Rochester too. So more mixed income housing developments, perhaps some home ownership opportunities too, that are smaller in size and probably provide a lower barrier entry in order to afford for a first time home buyer, for instance. So a lot of work in this area, and we'll continue to provide updates to the board as we move forward too. Moving into equitable transit, there's been a number of kind of big decisions that have had kind of sprinkles of equity within them that I wanted to highlight as part of the presentation today. The first being the bus rapid transit system. Cindy Steinhauser, Mayo Clinic, and a number of teammates providing a fare-free system for this, I think, is a great example of providing equitable access to transportation. The electrification of these vehicles, I think, is something, while typically thought of as a sustainability initiative, also provides a pretty important environmental justice concept too, in that we're running diesel buses along major roadways and highways in our community currently, and those air pollutants are building up in areas around homes that are typically lower income households and higher proportions of people of color living in those communities too. So the more that we can electrify our transit, the more we can avoid those environmental justice issues moving forward. To build further beyond mass transit, we've had a lot of work in our micromobility area too. We've invited Lime to our community, and there's been a lot of people riding scooters and electrified bikes over the past few years. Just a couple data points, around 13 to 15,000 unique riders use this system since inception. 13,000 in the first pilot period, and that usage has only grown since then. They do have a low income program. I would say we believe it is underutilized in our community. So if there are community members interested in more information, please contact me or people at the library, and we can help you get connected with that. Finally, we also have a free bike share program that we've been running through the library. Nice Ride offered the community 200 bikes about 4 years ago. And we've been using these bikes at the library for free checkout for anyone that needs them. We found that a lot of people were using these for grocery trips and running errands in our community. So we supplemented that bike fleet with 2 e-cargo bikes so people can move more packages, things at one time, and not have to exert as much physical effort to do so too. That program's been very successful, and we have some next steps planned for next year. And then finally, we also have a air quality sensor network that I don't think has been widely understood, but we want to measure changes over time in our air quality as well. So we have 14 sensors installed throughout the community. We're measuring air quality. So as we're making these changes to our mass transit, as more people are adopting maybe alternative modes of transportation or commuting, we have an air quality system in place to actually see, are we seeing environmental changes, and are we seeing some of these environmental justice issues being mitigated as a result of this work as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Dee to talk about our Equity Alliance work.
Thank you, Kevin. Dee Sable with Diversity Council, pleased to be here with partners who I think are incredibly committed to equity work. And I'm going to talk about the adoption of an Equity Alliance that we came together. And I think we were compelled, all 3 of our organizations, by 2 mandates, if you will, from community. The first of those being that the phraseology, America's City for Health, if you are a resident who lives here, is not a marketing phrase, right? We have deep health disparities. And if we want to consider ourselves America's City for Health, we have to look at those. The second is that when it comes to economic mobility and those kinds of things, people here understand that we're not going to solve our labor shortage issues just by continuing to bring in skilled labor from elsewhere. We have to fully utilize the potential of the existing workforce through skill building, through the reduction of barriers and those kinds of things. Those are the things that compelled us to develop an alliance of equity-focused individuals, practitioners, and organizations in the region that can think broadly about support for one another with the purpose of accelerating equitable change, right? Addressing the things that need to be addressed, recognizing that those don't belong to DMC, they belong to the entire community. And if we can build a coalition together to think and work on those things, everyone will benefit. This is a community that has both the desire to be excellent and the capacity to be excellent. And we need full equitable participation and the recognition of disparities and inequities in order to do that.
Thank you, Dee. Here. Yeah. There we go. Now it's working. My name is Wafa Al Khalifa, and I joined DMC last January as the Equitable Development Coordinator. I want to thank you, Dee, for giving us some background on City for Health. And one of the best and the biggest outcomes out of the City for Health group that has been convening here in our community is the creation of the community co-design approach, which is a community-centric approach that allows members from underrepresented communities to participate in the design and the process of policies, procedures, and the creation of public spaces or finding solutions for longstanding issues that we've had in our community. And you also reminded me every time I see you, Dee, when you invited me to participate as a co-designer for the Discovery Walk Park, the project that we talked about earlier. And that's where I got to meet Chow, where we both participated as co-designers prior to our current role. I think that speaks to one of the best impacts of community co-design and what it allows members of our community, like both of us, immigrants, women who live in this community, to access spaces that we never thought that we would have access to. And with community co-design and working as a co-designer for the Discovery Walk Park, we've seen other impacts of the other co-designers like Krista Jacobson, who connected with her community and the community that she associates with, which is a very important community in Rochester, that they have disability and physical challenges. And she shared some very helpful insights that was incorporated in the design of the park, where we're implementing heated sidewalks today for Discovery Walk Linear Park, because she identified that as a challenge for people with mobility challenges. Since Discovery Walk, Rochester has been implementing co-design as an approach in 10 projects. And last night, Chow and we were at the Rochester Area Foundation acting as co-design facilitators for the BIPOC home ownership project. We've also seen the success of community co-design in the Bloomberg Philanthropies Mayor's Challenge, where we were able to uncover issues and barriers BIPOC women face that's not allowing them to participate in the built industry. So community co-design has been adopted by different organizations here in Rochester. And I'm really glad to see that we are becoming more thoughtful of engaging with our BIPOC and underrepresented communities and making sure that they are part of designing public spaces like Discovery Walk or Sixth Bridge Street project, or finding solutions for issues like the home ownership disparities and the participation of women in the built industry. Another way of engaging and a part of DMC's commitment is building relationship. And as you're seeing this slide, all the logos of different organizations that we have been connecting with, establishing consistent communication. And I appreciate Chow touching on the disparities and who lives in our community. The number of our growing minorities that live in our community, seeing that growth also within Rochester Public Schools, that shows the need that we need to connect with different community organizations that work with underrepresented communities, or work with other organizations like SBDC or Ilocina, IMAA, Diversity Council, to get their help and assistance in processing like the Main Street Grant Program and helping our applicants. Tapping into these organizations and working with them has allowed us to learn about the lived experiences of the different communities that we have in Rochester, where it's a source of resilience and strength, but also allow these organizations to grow and to benefit from the resources DMC has to offer. With all the presentation that we've been sharing with you guys today, where are we heading as we're approaching the end of 2022 and we're heading into 2023? These are some of the things that we are looking to work on for next year. We want to further our conversations with the Rochester, just a second, because I want to say the name right, Coalition for Rochester Area Housing. We're working with them so we can find ways to help our BIPOC and emerging developers. How can we make Rochester more exciting for them and more helpful so they could lead their next project? We're also looking to identify and implement solutions to the housing issues that we have in Rochester. How can we create more affordable housing? How can we create housing that is equitable and accessible by all the communities that live in Rochester? Also, through some of the work and interactions that we had with the Main Street Grant and the co-design for that process and interacting with the communities that I shared with you in the previous slide, we learned that there is a huge appetite to highlight the businesses owned by minorities and BIPOC communities and give them the opportunity to show their business and to get access to more resources that we have in Rochester. And finally, as I talked about community co-design, we successfully completed our first leadership training for leaders from Olmsted County, Rochester Public Schools, City of Rochester. We invited them to attend a training where we're sharing with them how they can identify projects that's suitable for co-design. And we're looking into 2023 where we continue the same type of training and offer it to more leaders in our community so they can become more educated about co-design, but also we're looking to build capacity within our community by training co-design facilitators so we can get a little break as facilitators. But it's a really awesome way to engage with our community and to build capacity and offer co-design as as an approach that would engage with the communities in a different way. And since we did Discovery Walk, we launched our community co-design guide. We hosted a celebration for that. And the toolkit now is available for everyone, not only in Rochester, not only in Minnesota, so they could utilize it as a tool to engage with communities. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate this presentation. It does my heart good. I'm just smiling inside. It is all about a quality of life. And I think we need to continue to talk about our demographics and the kind of community that we have and making sure that quality of life is for every single person that lives in this community. And the work that you're doing is remarkable. I will say, since the Global Mayor's Challenge, I certainly, and I know others have been asked to present nationwide. The U.S. Department of Labor has been hugely interested in not only our co-design, but the Global Mayor's Challenge work that we're doing, because it is nation leading. We're ahead of what I think the U.S. Department of Labor and the Women's Bureau in particular are wanting to do. So I'll be speaking next week at National League of Cities about this very topic. Certainly not as expertise as all of you at the table because you're in it, but for and representing your work and this community. And I'm just incredibly proud of what we're doing. And one other point before I open it up that I wanted to ask about, just mention was the idea of the walkways. There's been a little pushback from some people, not necessarily even this community, but that have heard about the work that we're doing down in heart of the city, not maybe understanding our community, but about whether we should be doing the heated sidewalks. And I think the point that you made is there's a delicate balance we have to make and decisions we have to make when something is sustainable and when sustainability is like the key thing we're talking about, or whether ability and disability and access is the top point, and we have to strike that balance. And so for our community, that is a healthcare community that caters to people in ill health who may be in wheelchairs or walkers, not only, and our residents who live here that have, use that different kinds of abilities and mobility. We had to strike that balance. And I think we've made the right decision for our community and in heating the sidewalks and making our community more accessible in that downtown area. But that issue comes up, and I just wanted to point that out. I think it is a matter of looking, listening, and then hitting the right balance. And it may not be 100% in the sustainability avenue, and it may not be 100% in the disability, make everybody happy, but it's trying to strike that right place. And I think we're trying. We may not get 100% every time, but Kevin, and then we'll open it up.
Sure, just one quick comment too. So the heating systems from the steam condensate loop from Mayo Clinic, their district energy system. So as they're using the steam in their building, steam condensate is still routed back to the plant to be heated. It's that steam condensate that's heating the sidewalks for
So
Discovery
we can
Walk
argue
in
it
the
is
city.
sustainable.
You can, and then also
I like
having a snow melt system reduces the need for salt and other sand
Amen.
on those areas too. So there's some other environmental benefits that are gained as a result of that approach too.
Thank you for that. We don't often tell our story well enough. I think we need to keep doing that. Others, Brooke, do you have, I see you looking like you might want to say something.
I'll yield to others and get my thoughts.
Okay. Anyone else?
I just, I'll be quick, three quick points. One, just bravo to the community, to DMC, especially for the breadth, to have equity and inclusion, kind of working across, business goals, workforce, transit, housing. That is remarkable to kind of see that. And oftentimes in equity work, organizations and communities say, well, we're just going to do this one thing. And the fact is you have to work across all those areas. And that's what makes it more complicated. That's what makes it harder, more expensive. But just bravo to the community for really incorporating this across so many areas. Second, I just want to amplify what Dee said in terms of building our own workforce. So even if we do, the demographers have told us this statewide in every community, even if we maximize immigration, even if we do the best job we can of keeping our millennials and Gen Zers, and even if we do all those other things right, we still will have to build our workforce from within. And so when you look at the data point that you made, K-12 education, 44% of our school age children are children of color. And so that is our future. And we don't have to talk about it as a moral issue. It's an economic issue. It's all about competitiveness, and those communities that figure out how to harness that workforce are the communities that in fact will thrive. And so I think that's just a key second point. Third point, the importance of co-design as an approach. Through inclusion and engagement comes talent, directly connected to that question about workforce. Through inclusion and engagement and the co-design process, in fact, comes talent, right? We start to find new voices, and we start to find talent that can do incredible things in our community. So just bravo kind of across the board.
Anybody at that table been a co-designer?
Well,
The two of the 5 people in front of you started as co-designers and now are wonderfully talented employees of either DMC or the city.
okay, I'm ready when.
Okay, and I have RT as well. So
RT can go.
RT, would you like
Oh,
to
you
go
go
first?
ahead. No, you go ahead. I'll come back later.
Oh, okay. Just a couple comments. I know I've had a chance to speak to all of you regularly, and I'm just so grateful for your leadership and your work. This is really what sets DMC apart from many other economic development initiatives, right? Is the buy-in from the DMC team and our partners. And this really is a collective community responsibility. It takes the engagement and partnership across so many different sectors and representatives and leaders in our community, as well as those living and breathing and experiencing the inequities in our community, to come together and think creatively about how we can surround not only DMC, but all the work we're doing in our community with the support and sort of the net to make this economic development initiative successful. So thank you. Thank you for setting the gold standard for how we do our work at the city and DMC through this co-design process, and being a catalyst for setting the sparks for how this work can be done across the state and across the country.
RT.
I just think this is such good work, and I think you guys have all made really good points. And I want to just specifically say thank you to the mayor, who has made this a real mission of hers with the Bloomberg work and others, and for the council to have supported this so strongly. You know, so often this work is put in a deficit frame. What we're doing to help do special things for parts of our community. Anybody who spent any time in in a hospital, as I have with my mom quite a bit over the past 2 months, can look around and recognize the fact that the people who are helping those in those hospitals or in healthcare facilities for memory loss or anything else, how many of those people are either first or second generation immigrants? The fact of the matter is, healthcare in this country is dramatically, increasingly being supported by many of the people who we're talking about here having a better life in Rochester. And I'm sure Mayo has the data on that, but the anecdotes that I see, both in my wife's parents' care facility and what I've seen with my mom, recognizes that this isn't about doing special things for some parts of the community. This is about recognizing we're building a base for the workforce of today and tomorrow to be able to have a sustainable life here. And by the way, raise young people who will come back and be part of healthcare here. This is in the best interest of everybody in Rochester. So I just, you know, I was disappointed that when the first state legislation came through, it didn't put tougher mandates on us to do this work. Rochester has proved that they don't need mandates, that they'll lead on this. And I think it's just really inspirational.
Thank you, RT. I appreciate that. And we've had models here in town with Bridges to Healthcare, to your point, that has focused on our new move-ins and our new immigrants to this community to actually have quality training through a wonderful program with our Hawthorne Literacy Center. And it's actually kind of the foundation that we built our co-design process specifically with Global Mayor's Challenge, is learning what's worked and listening to the people in our community, asking them what they need and addressing those needs and challenges. So others.
I'll just jump in
Mark, sure.
on this Census Bureau information. What I find fascinating is that 14.1% of Rochester residents are foreign born. It's over 17,000 residents that are foreign born. That's incredible. I'm curious if we know how that compares to the 2010 census. I'm sure it compares off the chart compared to other communities of our size. But I mean, that's going to be the key to Rochester's strength going forward, is that we're attractive to people coming from foreign lands, and we got to figure out what we're doing right and keep doing it.
Did anyone have any information they want to share about that?
Yeah, keep them here.
Those data are available and could be shared. The growth rate since 2010.
The comparison since 2010. Does anyone know the change? I don't have it off the top of my head.
I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can certainly share it because I did have it from 2010 and then updated it for this one.
But it was a dramatic
Yes, it was a
shift.
great shift. And certainly communities who are foreign born and migrant immigrant communities tend to then welcome, right, folks from their own communities to come over. Yes.
And then there is actually a movement too among the different groups of immigrants. I've had a recent conversation with someone from the Minnesota Council, Asian Council, and shared with me the movement of specific Asian communities, how they would move here for specific workforce opportunity. And then if that opportunity it does not exist in our community anymore, then they move to a different community. So the question is how we can retain these communities here in Rochester. That's the question that we hope to get to answer.
That's what I just whispered to Commissioner Ty. And how do we keep people here, make sure that we are creating a space of belonging and create opportunity for people to really thrive. So not just be here and live here, but have the best opportunity available.
Absolutely. Other questions or comments? Thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation. I'll smile for the rest of the day. Next on our agenda then, thank you, is an informational items. And we got each of us got a packet of board materials in advance. And so Patrick, was your idea to go down through these or just take questions overall if people had them?
No, Madam Chair, members, we simply provide those and prepared to respond to any questions that you might have about any of them. We did come prepared, however, with a little bit of additional commentary on the Main Street program because we knew it was on some people's minds and it came up just now again. So we're prepared to provide a little bit more information on the Main Street program, which is, as you all know, is a program administered by the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And then we, DMC EDA, is a recipient of a grant to be used locally. So it doesn't really come through this board. And so we thought we would at least provide you with this insight in terms of how that is being used here. But we're prepared to answer any other questions about any of the other one pagers as well. But before we do that, Chris has been leading the Main Street program.
Sure. So thank you, Patrick. Good morning again, everybody. An update on the Main Street grant, Main Street Economic Revitalization Program grant that we received from the Department of Employment and Economic Development last year. Just to revisit the context behind this was a $3 million grant that we were awarded for capital funds that can be distributed out into the community. And in this particular case, it was within the DMC district. In order to understand how best to make those funds available to the community, we partnered with Dee and everybody at the Diversity Council and went through that co-design process, as you've heard about, and identified ways to make the funds available in a more equitable sort of manner, knowing that, hearing that the funds needed to be metered out over a period of time, so not the usual projects would get the funds. This is just a snapshot of where we are at right now. We have until April of next year to make awards on the remaining funds. Thus far, we've had 36 awards, adding up to just a bit over $2 million. 14 awardees have been BIPOC, women-led and or veteran-led businesses, which is 42%. And we're very pleased with how that is turning out. It's been a nice mix, predominantly retail and dining, but you can see that there's been some other uses as well, including housing and lodging, office and mixed use. A real primary part of our application when we sent it in, when we applied for the funds in the first place, we said, and I'll synthesize it this way, we wanted to make a small number of large awards and a large number of small awards. And the graph on the right is really showing that from left to right, that's the size of the grant award that is being made to the applicant and the number of awards of those sizes. So we're constantly metering that and monitoring that. The good news is we still have $1 million left over. The other good news is that we had applied for a second round of funding and we're secured that funding. And we're in the final process of signing the contract with Deed for that one. And that is for 2 other corridors of commerce. One is on 7th Street Northwest, and the other one is think the Beltline Southeast. So we will be implementing everything that we've learned from this round in deploying those funds out into those other areas, which are outside the DMC district, once we secure that contract with Deed. So that's about $950,000 we have available for that second round of awards.
I appreciate that. That is one of the calls that I get is it only for DMC or can it go outside? And
The second award.
The second one will go outside.
Right.
And I
Part of the application process, we had to identify corridors of commerce. And so they wanted to maximize impact, they meaning Deed. So we picked DMC's district for the first one and those other 2 for the second one.
Okay. And Brooke?
Yeah, quick question. For the remainder of the funds for the DMC zone, were those who applied who didn't receive funds given feedback and invited to reapply?
Yeah, there's only been 5 that have not been awarded funds. And it was either because they withdrew their application or they didn't qualify because they were outside the DMC district, as it turns out. But otherwise so they know they've been notified of that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Anything else you'd like to share?
That's it. Thank you.
Maybe I will just say, just make a point of the 19 retail and dining. So I would just say the death of the downtown has been largely rumors of the death of the downtown have been exaggerated. There are now 19 new businesses that are going to be moving into the downtown as in part with support. But these are businesses that we're going to make a commitment to downtown anyway, but the support helped get them across the finish line.
I appreciate that. We always see headlines when a business leaves and people somehow miss the headline when the new business opens. So it's good to remind us that it is churning and that we do have churning and we'll probably continue to have churning. But the fact that we're having new businesses move in is worth celebrating. Okay, the only other thought I had, Patrick, on these A through G here that we received in our packet ahead of time is the group just presented on community co-design. And the comment was made there that is something, a booklet has been put together that is shareable. The booklet isn't necessarily something you have to have in your hand. It is electronic as well. And so I know when I'm out talking, I send ahead a copy of that booklet. So it is going around the world and the community. And so if any of you here might want to take that back to your own community or share it with other communities, it is an electronic document you could request. I don't think we had it in our packet, but you could request that or we could send it to the board members here to share widely. We're proud of the work that has been done by DMC in the city of Rochester.
Could I, if there's no other questions, I could just finish by saying that for those of you who are here, we left a copy of an invitation to an event next week where representatives from Bloomberg will be in town where they are doing a deep dive in our community with respect to the Mayor's Innovation Grant. And there is a reception on Tuesday at 4:15 at the Art Center, Rochester Art Center, I believe. No, I'm going to get that wrong. But nevertheless, it's an opportunity for you all to see the progress that we're making under the mayor's leadership on this idea of reducing obstacles and barriers for women of color to enter the construction trades. And that one. Yeah.
Yes, and it's Studio 324.
Sorry.
Which is 324 South Broadway, where the event will be, the media event and happy hour will be held.
Yeah.
But they will be here for 3 days, I believe.
They will be,
yeah. Thank you.
That's the reception part.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We do have a meeting scheduled for February 2nd at 9:30 a.m. So that's the next meeting. And if there's anything else, nothing else, motion to adjourn. It's been moved and seconded. We have to do a roll call.
We do, and perhaps before I go into that, Madam Chair and board members, I would note that the statute requires for members who participate remotely to state a reason on the record as to why. That could be things such as scheduling conflicts or health reasons. So perhaps before I call the roll, I'll just ask Member Ryback and Member Campbell to provide that reason so we have it for the minutes.
Family health issues.
I have a very bad head cold.
Thank you very much. Okay, and as to the motion to adjourn, Member Baker, Member Campbell.
Aye.
Council President Carlson.
Aye.
Mayor Norton.
Aye.
Member Ryback.
Aye.
Commissioner Tyne.
Aye.
Chair Wheelock. Member Williams.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Have a good day.